have been working on since 5th grade. This is like something they've been checking in on for the last, we'll say, 4 years. And so they won first place in the 7th and 8th grade division. And Ms. Byers is their gifted teacher and has been a great support to them in their success. And so we want to acknowledge parents. Parents, will you stand up? Because they have been a great support, driving them to and from the fair. We just wanted to recognize the both of you and say we're very proud of you. We can kind of brag a little bit that we were the only school in the school district that had first place winners at the science fair. So let's give it up for two of our finest, Miss Francis and Mr. Thomas. You guys want to talk about the project?
Yeah, we'd love to hear about your projects if you'll share.
Come on, Thomas, come on around. Share.
So just
Yes, kind of tell me, give me a little background.
so yeah, we were looking for potential treatments for the disease ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease. We for our science fair ended up using computer simulations to try and find ways to stop what causes it. Should I go into that or?
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm not.
So basically, it was discovered relatively recently that ALS was probably caused by protein misfoldings in the brain. And so basically what we were trying to do was to stop the misfolding process, to stop the disease from progressing.
Wow. In 5th grade, right, there we go. No, congratulations. I think that's phenomenal, the work that you two are working on, and I'm pretty sure one day we'll see you guys making big waves in the engineering or medical field. So congratulations again on behalf of our administration and our community at Billy Mills.
Everybody does it.
Thank you. I know. Thank you so very kind. Thank you. Well done. Congratulations. Thank you for everything you do.
I know.
Really?
Okay, the next item is report of the board president, which I do have a few things tonight. So I'm going to start by saying on Wednesday, April 10th, Kelly, Melissa, and I attended the Restorative Justice Summit that was hosted by Justice Matters. Several members of the administrative team were there, Dr. Lewis and Jerry Kimball, several others, I'm sorry, that I'm not saying everybody. We had a lot of people, and we had over 50 teachers from across the district that also attended. And I would guess there was at least a couple hundred, maybe 300 people there community-wise, so it was very well attended. It was a good opportunity for us we kind of broke into two groups. There was the educational arm of it, and then there was the more criminal justice system arm. And we got to sit and really listen. I thought one of the biggest value adds for me was getting to sit and listen and talk to teachers about their experiences in the classroom, managing disruptive behavior, managing all sorts of things that they have to do with the kids these days. And so I thought it was a good event overall, and thank you to Justice Matters for hosting that event and inviting us to attend. On Monday, April 15th, the Equity Advisory Council and Delta met, and we were given a preview of the strategic planning process that we'll, as a board, kind of see tonight as well. I know that at least, I think you were down at Delta, I was up with the Equity Council, and they had a lot of questions, got a lot of feedback, so I'll be interested to see how that was incorporated into what we received tonight and as we go forward. And then finally, I wanted to begin a richer conversation with the board about our equity work. After Melissa and I attended the Beyond Diversity conference, and we came back and we suggested we really needed to create some equity policies that kind of clear up what our policies are around our equity work. And then at agenda setting last week, we really kind of dove in and talked about it a little bit more. And we want to see how they can really push our district forward. So we as a district have been investing in this equity work for 10 years. And while there's definitely been progress made, there's still a lot of work to do. And I think that we've had a lot of conversations, all of us, where we've heard it from the teaching staff and the community, where it just seems like what's next. And so I think it's important that our equity policies have clear guidelines about the district's expectations of staff, and that they provide district and building leadership with the tools that they need to make staff changes when individuals might be identified that don't want to participate fully in this work. I know this might seem like a bold step, but I know at least Melissa and I believe that it's long overdue, and I'd like this board to take that bold step and propel our district forward. We feel that without 100% of all staff committed to this work, we're just going to continue languishing and not making real changes. And so tonight, we just want to kind of gauge what the interest of other board members is for going down that firm path and continuing those conversations about making clear equity policies. And so you can kind of address it during your board commentary if you'd like, but wanted to get that out there in the public, as I would really love to see us do that as a board, particularly in this time when we're looking at strategic planning and how we can move that forward. And that, other than you should go to Showtime this weekend, because that's an awesome experience, and the tickets are on sale at Lawrence High and also at the Hy-Vee on 23rd Street. And my son will be in it, so you get to watch my son sing.
But, my daughter.
Yeah, and GR's daughter. So it's good times. All right, on to you, Dr. Lewis.
Okay, thank you. I definitely just want to echo my sentiments as it relates to the equity work. And I often say, we've been doing the work for 10 years. Now it's time to really see improvements in terms of practice, and so I appreciate the board definitely addressing that. And one of the things that I shared at Convocation was a quote around equity, and it said, equity is not measured in the how many conferences we attend, how many books we read, or posters we display in our classroom. It is measured, or it must be measured, by its reflection in our practice, and that's when we know that our equity work is really sticking, when we see reflections of the work in our practice. And so I appreciate the board bringing this to the front. The students that just left, the scholars that just left, that's what education should be about. Now, that was a science fair, which those things come, once a year sometimes, and sometimes once in a lifetime for some of our students. But that's what everyday education should look like for our scholars. And what they're doing is solving problems. And so we must continue to make sure that we're equipping our scholars with those skills to not only be problem solvers, but also problem finders. And just with that science fair, I'm sure it addressed a number of content areas. And so definitely excited about and want to definitely congratulate those students for that. And with that, we're also thrilled with the opportunities that will lie in our district. We had enough votes, rather, through this redesign process. And so we're looking forward to our staff being able to do some amazing things, some creative things for our students, some creative thinking around meeting our individual students' needs. And so those journeys that Broken Arrow, Deerfield, Hillcrest, and Free State High School will be on will definitely serve as models for not only for our district, but also for the state. We're also fortunate that most redesign trainings will actually occur right here at Greenbush, which is one of our sites. It's in the former Rockarusa Valley building. Again, congratulations to Hillcrest. They were again honored as a National Blue Ribbon Award winner at the State Board of Education meeting on last week. And so we're definitely proud of the work that Principal Tammy Becker has done with the entire Hillcrest staff. And I'll also thank you to Nancy Springer. She made the trip down there with her, and they actually presented to the board on some of the exciting things that's taking place over at Hillcrest. Just want to give an update on our strategic planning process. Jessica mentioned where we are in the process. Those leaders did meet with several groups around those objectives that have been identified with those 5 themes. So they did present to the Equity Advisory Council, the District Equity Leadership Team, Advisory, our Parents of Color, and the District Site Council. In addition, these teams have sought feedback from our PEG affiliates, practitioners, and are reaching out to our Executive Leadership Team this week, as a matter of fact, next week rather, to actually develop those objectives and performance measures. We will bring that work back to the board at our May 13th board meeting. I want to congratulate Tom Lautz. I think that's right, Lautz. Okay, I hear some nods. Well, I see some nods, rather. Tom Lautz is actual supervisor at facilities, and maintenance and construction. He actually earned our Class Act Award on last week. He has worked with the district for over 10 years in general maintenance and carpentry and was definitely promoted recently as April the 1st as a supervisor in that role. So congratulations to Tom Louts. I'd like to publicly thank Woodlawn Elementary School's 5th grade teacher, Brandon Daly, for putting on yet another Guys Night Out this past Friday. Was fortunate enough to receive the invitation to speak and to just be there with men in the community that came back, that assembled on a Friday evening to just spend some time with about 50 young men over there at Woodlawn. We did some scavenger hunts, we did some carpentry, some drilling, some nailing. But the whole goal that night was all around identity and making the right choices. And so it was a successful event that I've never seen happen anywhere. And so definitely kudos to Brandon Daly and definitely Principal Janine Friedel for allowing him to do that. There was also a girls' night out a couple of weeks ago as well, but I didn't attend that one. Our Farm to School team was invited to present a school district success spotlight at our first Kansas-Missouri Farm to School Summit in Kansas City, Missouri last week. Farm to School also hosted last week its Junior Call Valley Farm tour for 7th graders from our middle schools. Students learned the importance of buying locally and eating seasonally. You may have read today's paper that the Growing Food, Growing Health program involving West Middle School Garden and the Merck has struck a new partnership. We're excited to announce that partnership with Just Foods. They have set a goal of harvesting 2,000 pounds of produce by May. I'm sorry, excuse me, not by May. They won't be able to do that by May. But they have a goal of harvesting. It's not going to happen. A goal of actually harvesting from May to November. And this will be obviously donated to our to the food pantry. Definitely invite the board and the public out to visit the Lawrence Schools Foundation.org and purchase tickets to the Follies that are coming up this Friday night. It will be over at Liberty Hall. And again, this is an annual fundraiser that we're raising money for teacher innovation and school grants. It will feature food, music, drinks and also music by a cover band. There will also be dancing and some karaoke. I may perform. The foundation will present its Golden Apple Award to 2 educators at its All-Star Award to a group of deserving LEAP partners. And then finally, the Lawrence Arts Center will host an exhibit of K-12 student work starting this Friday through May 10th. Excuse me. A reception will be held from 5:30 to 7:30 on Friday to announce the students and the art educator winners. Excuse me. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you. And now we have patron commentary, and unless we have another one, Julie, I just have one. One more? Just this one. Okay. And so Denise Fish, if you'd like to come up. And then our audience participation, we thank you for sharing your thoughts with the USD 497 Board of Education. And this is your time to share opinions. However, complaints about specific staff need to be shared and heard in executive session only. While you're not required to share your contact information, we ask that you do so that we can follow up with specific concerns that you have. And I see that you have, so thank you, and you have 5 minutes.
Okay. Good evening, Dr. Lewis and members of the board. My name is Denise Fish, and I am an ISA at Prairie Park Elementary and a 21-year veteran of Lawrence Public Schools. I'm here on behalf of the Paraeducator Association of Lawrence. I want to thank you for your time this evening and the willingness to listen to some concerns that face our paraeducators in the district. The Paraeducator Association of Lawrence has a clear mission to promote standards and practices that most effectively empower paraeducators to do the tasks assigned to them to the utmost quality for the benefit of our students in the USD 497 school district. We believe that those standards and practices include, but are not limited to, a concerted effort to find and institute adequate professional development specifically designed to increase job knowledge and skill sets for paraeducators in various programs at all levels of education. Increased communication from building staff and administration as well as district leadership for paraeducators that often is reserved only for certified employees at this time. And dedication by building staff and administration as well as the district leadership to promote a culture of equity, respect, and inclusion for all paraeducators in all buildings and in every program. In a recent poll put out by our association to all paraeducators in the district, we found that if payroll deduction were an option, our organization could gain as many as 121 more members, as this option was a financial necessity in order for them to join. To further the progress made for paraeducators this year, often supported by the efforts at the district level, it is an urgent necessity that members be granted the ability to have membership fees automatically deducted from their paycheck. The Paraeducator Association of Lawrence is registered as at the federal and state level as a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We have written bylaws and a constitution approved by our attorney, and we have an established bank account with Truity Credit Union. All known necessary steps have been taken to ensure we are eligible for consideration for payroll deduction. During the first semester, our leadership met with Dr. Lewis and other key district administrators to ask them to consider our request. We were told that it was an item they would like to discuss with the board privately, and we have followed up on these items throughout the year and have received no response to indicate any progress. For all of the positive dialogue conferred at the district level in the first semester, we feel as though that goodwill might have lost its steam in the second semester of this year. We thank the district for their efforts, but we urge them to seriously consider and approve our request for this option. For paraeducators, payroll deduction is not just a nice option. It is the most economically feasible manner in which our fees can be taken out for a population whose pay inhibits them from ever having the bulk membership fee to pay at once, and who oft fear that a debit might come across on their account when the bills were simply too much for their pocketbook that month. The sincerest ambition of our association is to be positive advocates for the USD 497. The district has perpetual difficulty filling these vital paraeducator positions. We desire to promote Lawrence Public Schools as the gold standard for communication, equity, respect, inclusion, professional development, and a living wage in order to assist in the recruitment and retention of quality paraeducators. We want the profession of a paraeducator to be a highly sought-after career in Lawrence and surrounding cities and counties. Lawrence has historically been a groundbreaking and progressive community. We ask you, by taking this small step, to start the journey to setting the benchmark for all paraeducators. We ask that you deliberate regarding this request and get back to us in the timeliest fashion possible. Thank you for your consideration on this matter. Striving with you as one team for all students. Thank you, the Paraeducator Association of Lawrence. And I do have copies of what I've just read in case you want to go back and look at my comments.
Thank you. So we are moving on to board commentary. Who would like to go first? Shannon?
Just a couple quick things. Wanted to share that I was able to attend the ALICE training that occurred at this building at the ESC on April 12th. Tony Barron and Ron May did a very nice job of facilitating that training, and it was an extension on what the board had already heard and learned when we did our own Avoid, Deny, Defend training with the Lawrence Police Department last spring. So it was good. It was good to see that those trainings had a lot of things that aligned or really went together, and also to just have a better understanding of what our staff and our teachers are hearing when they're going through this training for our district. The only other thing, Kelly and I had a policy meeting last Monday, and we mostly worked on working through some additional updates from Kansas Association of School Boards on policies, a lot of really minor stuff, but we're just working our way through those and anticipate having some things on the board agenda for a first review probably by the next time we finish our next meeting, which will be 2 weeks from now.
Mm-hmm. And just kind of overview, in addition to what,
I am finished, yes.
We're also looking at a dress code policy and are working on the equity policy. And I was also at the district site council meeting and asked that they provide some feedback related to the dress code policy as well. So we're looking at updating that. And just wanted to let you know that those two things, we have some progress and movement in terms of asking for participation and help with them.
Here?
Yeah. So, Julie, you might want to pay attention in case you need to throw something at me in case I say something I shouldn't. So, I give Julie a lot of credit and a lot of power. So after a year on the board, I'm finally going to start to pick up the model that Shannon has always tried to get me to follow, which is take notes in meetings that I'm at so I can come back to the board and report on them. She desperately tries to get me to do that. In the last Power School team meeting that we were at this last Friday, just to give an update on that, I go to that meeting every Friday from 10 until we're done. It's scheduled from 10 until noon, and so just to give an update on that they're working on the secondary schedule. The middle school schedule is already done. It's in the tweaking phase. They're kind of working on the Bell schedule at this point. They're working through some pinch points based on some overlap with the specials schedule and trying to figure that out. And the high school is at the point of working on the master schedule. They're working on getting immunization data into Power School so we can see that. We might have to write our own module to import that data. The new returning student form is going to go live into Power School, and Julie's working on crafting a communication to go back out to parents to help encourage, because we want parents to go into Power School to fill out that form, and so they haven't signed up for an account. We'll take them through that process again and hit new kindergartners to sign up and things like that. We're working on summer school as an entity. It's built into Power School, and we're hoping over time that we can get every summer program that we have built into Power School and under the same fee schedule so that we can all do the same fee schedule, whether it's fall fees or summer fees are all done under the same umbrella. And so they've at least got summer school built. The next is to get camps and other things built into Power School. Then the last thing that we talked about was grading practices. This last year for middle and high school, there was 3 options to grade. You could grade based on categories, total points, or by term. And this next year, they're going to limit it to by points or by categories. The thing that's interesting is that the district has 5 default categories, so like homework, tests, final, and things like that, but teachers have an ability to create their own categories. And this last year at the high school level, there was 190 custom categories created, and at the middle school level, there was 88 custom categories created. So they're going to work in professional development in the fall to work through helping teachers understand how those custom categories work and to understand the significance that if you create a category and weight it 50% of the total grade and only have one assignment in there, the impact that has on the total grade for the kid. And so we talked through that, and they're working through putting the professional development together for grading specifically. So that's where that is.
Great, thank you. Anybody else?
I just wanted to, in addition to adding to Shannon's comments about related to the policy committee, I wanted to tell you all that I attended Kansas Action for Children's screening of No Small Matter, and it was about early childhood education, and a lot of the information that was in that particular film would not be new information to a lot of, I would say all of our board members, as we've received information about early childhood education, but it did remind me of the importance of that component of our educational responsibility, and how we as a district begin to expand and incorporate more early childhood education in our programming, and also look at, similar to the comments related to paras, organizing, how with early childhood educators as a community, we bring their pay on par minimally with what teachers in our district receive. So I just wanted to point that out. And then just to talk a moment about the Para-Educator Association of Lawrence, I would like to request additional information on the payroll deduction, if we could have that coming to the board in a next meeting or so we can understand where we're at with that process. And want to echo support for the comments you made at the beginning of the meeting and appreciate that you said it. So thank you.
Yeah, and I just echo what you said and Jessica said about having the agenda setting and really talking about the equity policies and with the Beyond Diversity, Courageous Conversations that we've been having, it's time for us to take some next steps. And I know Jessica said, you know, to kind of gauge the board members on next steps. And obviously, you know, per her report, that's something that I support. And we want to emphasize that is not that there's no training. We all can be educated on equity issues and just really just being teachable. We all have to be teachable. During the Justice Matters conversation, I had a teacher walk up to me and not to say that I'm perfect, but she's like, I really appreciate you making the comment about husbands or partners, because that just, you know, made me feel included in the conversation. Is not always that one size fit all. So that is that shows that we, you know, really have to make some progress on that and hold people accountable. And where you're not teachable, you know, kind of think about next steps from there.
I think one of the things that we really talked about, I mean, just to be, I guess, more clear, was this notion of how do we get people in our district who really are still not on board with our equity work or still harming children in the classrooms or wherever they might be located, to go move on with their career somewhere else, and to allow our building administrators and our leadership to have the teeth to be able to move in that direction. And so I think because we don't have a policy that clearly articulates what the expectations are, there's a lot of reluctance, I think, on our building leaders in particular, to make some of those moves at times when maybe they should have been taken. And so I think that as a board, we're just at that point now, if we're really serious about this, and clearly we are. We've been spending money on this and doing this as a district for a long time, that it really is no longer something that's optional for us. To make sure that if it's not something that you're comfortable with as a staff member, then this is not the right district for you.
Is there have we kept track of what percentage of our employees are in the training? I know
Yeah, so the training is mandatory, so everybody goes through it. I mean, there may be some new people that haven't quite gotten there yet, but as a general rule, everybody has, it's about 100% in that regard.
Administration or new administration, or board members are involved.
That's the expectation.
Yeah. I think it's hard to send that message if we haven't all completed that.
Yeah. So I think that my main concern when we were talking about it is how do we get us moved to the place where things can move forward in a really.
So you're talking about setting an expectation that if you have staff that are not meeting that the standards that we put forward in terms of the equity principles and values that we're guiding, that there be a clear path to request that the person leave.
That's correct.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that we can do in policy committee, and Melissa will be involved in this work, is as we are looking at best practices in other districts, looking for examples of policies that address this, and to see how districts have managed that, and then provide some options for us to consider. So we are.
My guess is PEG probably knows of some of the districts who have those policies that are a little more strict and clearly articulated, that may have done it longer than us or just faster than us. Yep. But is there anybody who is uncomfortable with going that direction? And that's really what I wanted to kind of do, because if we do that, then that's a board policy decision that then the superintendent is going to have to execute
I'm not uncomfortable with considering it. I think as a board, we do have to be, we are going to have to better define what we mean when we say equity work, right? Because, we can talk about how we want staff to deliver instructions to students and all of that sort of thing. And I would hope that our staff have values in their hearts that allow them to do that authentically. But I think we do have to be mindful of how we write a policy like this.
Yeah, I
Right.
mean in terms of
There
like due process.
Well, and just in terms of we can set expectations about how staff behave and what they do in the classroom, but we can't tell them what to believe. Right. So there's some First Amendment issues that are, I think, just off the top of my head sitting here, if we're going to go that direction, we have to be very mindful of better defining when we say equity work, what do we mean by that, and what are those expectations, and what are the outcomes that we're looking for. And I think as a board, I have a good sense, and we all have a good sense of what we mean by it, but that's important, that we're clear.
I would just encourage the policy committee to make that a priority, to get a draft of that out and to think through.
It is for sure. I mean, adding that layer, that's helpful. Like getting that feedback is extremely helpful. But the equity policy is probably our highest priority, I would say.
It's certainly in terms of the follow-up items that we have right now, and in the homework that Kelly and I are tasked with doing to move things forward. It's at the top of the list.
I think that making sure that we do it right. There is so the process of identifying and reviewing the various models and then bringing the right people to the table. Where right now, that's what's happening right now, is creating that plan and looking at what policies exist. But it's helpful to understand, particularly from, as you mentioned, like what happens at DELT or what you've heard at the Equity Council. That feedback is helpful, but we want to engage people in a more meaningful way in the process. So we're just mapping out what that might look like.
Do you want to say anything else on this?
Well, just I appreciate the conversation, but one of the things that we have to ensure is that, one, we make sure that all of our staff are trained. That's one thing, and I definitely echo Shannon's comments. We can't change people's beliefs. We're not trying to change anyone's belief, but what we can is influence behaviors and practices. And when certain behaviors and practices hurt kids, that's a major problem for me. And so when the board expects me to improve student outcomes, if I bring a budget to the board that's not looked at through an equity lens, or if I'm making some decisions that are not with the best interest of students in mind from an equity standpoint, I shouldn't be in this seat. And so I talk about high accountability, high expectations, but we also will make sure we provide that support. And so every adult will have the support needed to make sure that he or she understands those practices and behaviors. But at the end of the day, when we begin to hurt children, then we have to make some decisions that, and like you said, this may not be the district for you if your behaviors or practices are not in line with ultimately the equity policy and the vision that we have for this district.
So,
Go ahead.
well, no, I certainly agree with that. I think for me, it would be really helpful to see what some of those other policies look like, because right now it's kind of an abstraction. So to see what other districts have done, and I know you guys, I mean, you'll see that, but not being on the policy committee, I don't necessarily have access to that. So if there is some data gathering in terms of what other districts are doing, and maybe BEG recommends, if we could all get a copy of that, I think for me that would be helpful.
I think that it'll be important. I don't think the work that we do in our committee will be of a nature. It'll be different than what we typically do when we're working through policy. A lot of times we just work through the policy and we bring our best practice recommendation to the board. I think on something like of this magnitude, it's going to require more work from the board as a whole,
I think,
than would typically be the case.
and as as we're looking at the policies and getting those ideas, I mean, unless you want to research, but I think if the policy team, like, this is the demographics of this area is similar to ours, or even if it isn't, but is good, sound policy, we can reference, can you reference, like, okay, you know, we got this from Minneapolis, or, you know, if you want to look at theirs, because, you know, it's edited, you know, we might take some of those things and
I expect there'll be multiple drafts, and I think that's a great idea to share any good policies that we might want to be taking pieces and parts of with the rest of the board is great.
So as long as we're processing this, so that this is something that could take a long time. When I mean a long time, you could spend a year looking at, or we could shorten that timeline. So for you, Dr. Lewis, and your strategic planning, when would you like to see a draft?
I'll tell you, the sooner the better.
Okay.
I've always operated from a standpoint our kids can't wait.
Okay.
And I definitely understand and respect the amount of time that needs to go into a good, solid policy. But the sooner the better. And really, if we had that policy and the strategic plan, you know, completed in tandem, I think that will. I think that'll work for us.
And if we need to, I mean, think about it, and we don't have to
always
make
tweak
this
it.
decision, but we can always kind of create an ad hoc group, so it's not just the two of you having to do.
I don't think it should be the two of us. That's part of the planning. Part of the planning is looking at how, where we're at right now is really organizing how do we create this policy in a way that in and of itself is equitable. So there is a whole, it feels a little bit like when I do community organizing, there is a huge, I could map this out forever in terms of just like how we proceed. So I'm trying to be thoughtful in that process. But perhaps, I respect the need to speed this up a bit. So maybe rethink how we're organizing that in the spirit of getting something in front of the board.
And as we're, I know Equity, EAC and the Delta are in the process of electing new chair people, and that would be something to consider. Like if it's an elective process, so they're selecting this individual to represent the committee, maybe having them part of
an ad hoc group.
Yes.
Maybe a good next step would just be to put together a process of what that would look like, because again, if we're going to create a brand new policy on equity and it's going to be fairly strong languaged, right? Then I think running that by Delta, running that by the Equity Council would be a really great piece, component of that before it's, officially.
That's 100% already part of the process. So it's it's a matter of.
I think you guys think on it and then maybe come back with a kind of a plan, or if you do want to put together a larger group and maybe have people like Anna or people from the Equity or Delta or other board members on that.
I think we'd like to, as a planning group, limit it to 3 board members, not because we don't want everybody involved, but any discussions that beyond 3 board members have to happen here. So,
right. I think that's fair.
And that's really kind of what we were thinking, starting with the 3 of us and then broadening it out as we have some direction and explanation to give about where we're headed. One of the things that on a first pass at this, when we've looked at doing this before, we can find a lot of examples from really large districts, and that presents some challenges we have to think through. We don't have a full-time staff office dedicated just to this, and a lot of districts that have really robust policies do have multiple staff people whose jobs are this. So we have to think through how we can draft something that is right-sized for Lawrence and both meets our needs and is manageable from an administrative perspective.
Okay. So next we need to approve consent agenda items, and I know that we have some retirements, or at least one retirement.
Yes, the board would like to express their sincere appreciation to Mr. Wayne Long of Lawrence High School for his 8 years of service and devotion to this community. We wish you the best in your future endeavors.
Okay, and then I failed to read this first, so I will now just go ahead and make the motion. But consent agenda items are those that are considered routine and are adopted by one motion unless a board member or superintendent requests that it be removed. The items are voted on separately at that point. So I go ahead and move that the Board of Education adopt the items listed on the consent agenda.
Second.
Fincher?
Yes.
Gordon Ross?
Yes.
Ingram?
Yes.
Jones?
Yes.
Kimball?
Yes.
Beeson?
Yes.
Johnson?
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0.
Okay, and our first report tonight is with Ron May and Jose Cornejo on school safety.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening. Sorry.
That was kind of a, buying some time. Good evening. So again, good evening. I'm Ron May, Director of Operations. And tonight, I'll be providing an update and some ongoing things that we're doing with security in the district. So we'll just start with Alice training. About this time last year, we were investigating what kind of active shooter training that we would like to use for the district. We had worked with the police department with Avoid, Deny, Defend, and some other philosophies. We chose to go with ALICE, which is an acronym for Alert, Lockdown, Inform, Counter, and Evacuate. We went with that with ALICE because it had a very nice curriculum and a way for us to track employees and people who have been assigned or been invited to take the courses. To this point, we have a little over 1,800 of our LPS and Boys and Girls Club staff who have taken the course online. That's about 78%. I do need to do some cleaning up of some of those numbers. I think there's some retirees and a few people that are in the system that need to be cleaned out of that. That'll bring the number up a little bit. And then we're constantly hiring new people, and so we're assigning them, and so as they get time to take it, we can. And then we do have a few people that haven't taken the online course, and I'm working with the administrators, with their administrators to make sure that they get those courses taken. But I can see who the individuals are, and I can see and send invitations to them. All of the schools and educational programs in the district have received the secondary on-site training where we go on-site and we do a review of the information, and then we do some hands-on training as far as, enhanced lockdown procedures, evacuations, and things like that. The only two groups that remain that need total training is facilities and operations. Out in there, we haven't done a secondary program out there yet, which that's where I live right now. So of course that home is always the last place, right? And then Boys and Girls Club, we've trained some of their people, but to get everybody, we're gonna have to do it on a Saturday because they're usually working when we're doing, most of our trainings have occurred during early releases on Wednesdays. All of our trainers are certified for one more year. We have 8 trainers right now certified. We have room for 10 total. Tony Barron and I are our trainers. We have a few of our building level administrators, and then all 4 of our SROs are also trained as trainers. So we've all kind of, in the beginning, we really tried to buddy up and support each other, and we still try to support each other if we can, but we've all kind of gone out and done some singleton things as well. We'll continue to do on-site training on our schools annually. The teachers don't have to retake the online course every single year, but we are going to continue to provide that on-site training so we can pick up what the new teachers haven't received, plus we can kind of enhance and build on what the teachers, because as we continue to do it, the teachers and the staff members will be a little bit more comfortable with what we're doing, and we can kind of expound on that. The students receive their training through the crisis drills. There's not a specific curriculum for kids, so most of what they're receiving is from the teachers. When we have a crisis drill, or some, or discussions in the class, that's when they go over the procedures in my classroom. This is what this is going to look like. I'm going to need you to do these things and, prepare this way. We do have some interest at the high school levels, both principals. They have broadcasting departments that the students want to create some student-led videos that will be really nice. There's some other districts that do similar things that can be very effective for kind of giving students some of that general kind of information that we could use within the district. And there's also a I'm Not Scared, I'm Prepared book and activities that's been developed for the primary levels, K2, K3, and we provided that out to the elementary buildings as well to kind of help with some of the younger students to kind of get a little understanding of, how to broach the topic without being very upfront and blunt about everything. Just there's sometimes scary people out there. There's people that want to do bad things, and when that happens, you need to listen to me and follow instructions, kind of stuff. Any questions about Alice training at all? Okay. We've done some physical plant safety improvements. Through the bonds that we've done, you all are aware, we've put secure entrances in all of our school buildings. We've expanded on that. We put a secure entrance on the ESC here. In some cases, like at East Heights or even HR and some places around here where a full-blown secure entrance wasn't feasible, we've put on a door buzzer system with video monitoring, and we've used that pretty successfully in some areas that you couldn't do the full secure entrance, and it's been working very well, I think. Lawrence High School, you'll see there's an asterisk there. So throughout the rest of this presentation, we'll see some asterisks. I'll try to remember to bring your attention to that. We've generated a list of items that came up as concern or things that we'd like to see done based on community input and some things as we've had these community conversations, had time to sit down and do some surveys, talk to them about our strategic planning. So some of those items are addressed directly, and I've asterisked those, and then at the end we'll see a list of the other things that we're kind of continuing to go down the road with. So Lawrence High School was obviously some concerns for people. Right now, the administration, they've locked down all those open doors that we've had. I think at the time there were about 4 or 5 open doors that were open pretty much all day. It's down to just the main entrance, which is secure. And then they're monitoring those doors and opening them as needed using staff. We're limiting student movement in some of those areas like the annex. Instead of pulling kids out of some of those classes with passes, they're waiting until they're back into the main building or something, so they don't have kids just kind of coming and going. And if they do need to get that student, then they're having somebody escort them. I'm happy to say we are working towards implementing a student ID with door access to help with some of that, and John Gottstein texted me today saying that those should be ready to distribute tomorrow to LHS. So each LHS student we'll have a student ID on the next slide. You'll see a kind of a picture of it. You'll have a student ID much like yours, only it'll be horizontally, it'll be in that landscape type, but then it'll still hang vertically. So at a visual, you will know very easily that it's a student, not a teacher ID card. But those IDs will be limited to just the 4 or 5 doors that they need access to. They'll only be accessible between 7:30 and 4. If a student loses their card, it can obviously be taken down offline very quickly. We have a system in place for if there's a loss. It's like a $5 is what we're into those to get those to the kids. We've also have provided a lanyard. It's not a fancy one, but it is a breakaway one, so making sure when somebody yanks on one, like it's going to probably happen, it should pop off and not choke somebody or hurt somebody.
So are they going to be required to turn those in at the end of the school year?
Yes, thank you. So at the end of the year, we would have those turned back in. They would be deactivated after the final school date anyway, so if they walked, they still aren't going to be usable. But the point of getting those turned back in is that we could actually reuse them the next year with the kids. So to keep costs down, we would only need to do the freshman class coming in and then new students, so we could reuse those cards for the next year.
So I have 2 kids that use the annex, or that are in the annex, and they report that instruction has been disrupted by the inability to move through the building because of the the design is poor. They report having trouble getting into the building. They have to knock on the gifted teacher's window, and that teacher then has to come out and let them in. They're saying that they can't get out to the restroom, that they have to cut through someone's class to get to the restroom. So these are teenagers reporting, and I don't want to make it sound like I don't believe what teenagers say to me or my own teenagers, but I did want to just clarify, because obviously I support the effort, but is it disrupting instruction in a serious way?
I haven't heard anything directly from the administration, but I will definitely follow up on that to find out. I do know that there were some concerns because the annex did not, that's one of the situations where the badge access isn't in all those areas, and part of that's because there wasn't there wasn't space to put those into a panel in order to allow it.
Yeah.
So I do know some of those doors were locked down, and we provided keys to staff members so that they would be able to key people in and out. But I'll need to check on that, because I do know the annex is kind of, there's one place where you can access and get to everything pretty easily, but then there are some kind of mazes back in there.
I would say particularly the freshmen, who are maybe a large portion of their day is to reduce the amount of embarrassment that they might bring to themselves. I did notice that for my youngest child, she was in a very uncomfortable situation and didn't know exactly how to get to her classroom, didn't know how to, didn't know if she should go all the way to the main office, come back again. I mean, it was a very, the tail was long and her rage was huge. So if we could just look into what that means for those kids.
Sure. Absolutely, I'll do so. Thank you. And along with that, that leads right into the next part as construction starts. So when the school year begins next year, the annex will be offline to start the year, so we won't even have students traveling out there. And then phase 2, which will be in January, the annex will open back up, but there will be access to it without having to go in and out. So that'll solve those issues that we're dealing with at the moment. But I will thank you. I'll definitely follow up on that with the administration at LHS. So here's a picture of what those ID cards look like. You can see there's a lion superimposed in the back there, so pretty nice. It came out very nice. I was pleasantly surprised. Our concern was with the timing that we needed to get this done for this year, that I didn't know if we were going to be able to get pictures on, because it was all determinant on pulling information off of PowerSchool and getting it into a database that would play nicely. And it took them a couple days, but they got it figured out. Our tech guys did a great job. I think Ron Fowler, Lanny, John Gottstein did a great job on that. The Safe and Secure Schools grant. So at the beginning of the summer last year, the state offered up, I think it was $5 million to everybody in the state for basically any kind of safety and security needs that you might have as a district. I requested $337,000. It's a matching grant, so you would receive, we requested, I think, a little bit more than that. I think it was like $360,000. We received almost everything we asked for. We were one of the 4th or 5th highest granted in the state. I was very happy with that as well. So these are matching grants and I just picked items because we had to do it very quickly. It was a quick turnaround, so I only picked things that we were going to be purchasing anyway. So we knew our money was going in that direction. So $270,000 almost is for security cameras and video management software. The cameras will be for upgrading some of our older ones that aren't compatible with the system anymore, as well as embellishing on some of the systems we need to add some cameras to. The new video management software we're pretty excited about. It's going to show almost a zero, like a big cost savings after this first year, because they license the cameras completely differently. In the past, we've been paying every year per license per camera. They license their cameras by a slot, so not that we do this very much, but if you have a slot and you put 3 cameras in it, you're still only paying for the one slot, and it's a one-time fee. So this software will give us a definite savings over time. It'll also open up an opportunity for us to grant secure web access to first responders if needed. So right now, we can access it if we're in the district on district network, and an SRO could do that if they were at Free State or anywhere. but this would open it up so the person could access it securely off-site. $52,550 for ongoing ALICE training costs. And then $15,000 was to build go buckets for the classroom. That's something we've kind of had in the background trying to do for a while, and it's also along with ALICE training, it's just having we'd be looking at a 5-gallon bucket that would have some first aid supplies, water, snacks, a few of various items like that the teachers can either, if you have to hunker down in your room, then you have it there with you, or you can grab it and go if there's an emergency that you need to.
And Ron, those are those designed for use in any kind of a wide range of emergencies? So say you had a natural disaster.
This is not just about active shooter. This is about, because in many situations, whether it's a tornado, active shooter, things like that, you may be locked down in your room for hours. So, giving water, having snacks, maybe even having paper and crayons and things for activities, having a light source, and because it's a 5-gallon bucket, it would double as a toilet.
Yep.
So lots of different things that can be used for.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
You were looking for donations on those buckets?
Yes, so that is something we are actually. So the $15,000 is at approximately $15 a bucket for 750 classrooms if you look at it district-wide. We're working with LPD to get some donations. I'm working with Menards and Home Depot and a few other places to see if we can get a discount or if we can get some donations towards the buckets. There's also, through Douglas County Emergency Management, there's some things we're looking for just for things that would go into the bucket. So anything we can to keep the bucket cost down so that we can have more items in it. Yeah.
Yeah, we have it in my district.
Some more updates. So this is another asterisk item, something that was brought up through our community conversations. We are. I've been getting some support from the Department of Homeland Security. Before we did the first bond for the elementary schools, I had gone through and done a security audit with the Department of Homeland Security. We've set one up again for another one, and we're probably going to set it up on a 2-year revolving basis. But in the middle of September of next school year, Chuck Clanahan from Topeka will come over. We'll spend 60 to 90 minutes in every building going through, doing a complete crisis or a school audit, security audit, and then we'll come back at the end of the week and come in with the building administrators as a whole and talk to them about what we found, what are their concerns, and kind of put together an action plan that we need to follow. Also working with them as we update and revise our emergency operations plans and crisis plans. We have those in place. It's not something that the state requires, but it's something that we've done for the last several years, but they always need to be updated and made current. There will be crisis drill changes. So I think if you remember last year, 2 years ago, the standard in Kansas was you did a fire drill every month and you did 3 tornado drills, and then it was recommended but not required to do a couple of lockdown drills. That was 2 years ago. This year, the state and the fire marshal, actually, the state gave the fire marshal latitude to pick what they thought was best, and the fire marshal said, you're going to do 16 drills this year. You're going to do a crisis drill every month. You're going to do 4 fire drills, and you're going to do 3 tornado drills. And that's been a pretty big project along with everything else for our buildings. An evacuation may only take 3 or 4 minutes. It's 20 minutes of getting everybody back and in and out and settled down, and that can be disruptive to the day. It's very important, but it can be disruptive. So next year, the law will say that we're going to do 2 tornado drills, 1 in September and 1 in April. And then you're going to alternate between fire drills and crisis drills for the other months, making a total of 9 drills, 1 per month. So I think it'll be a much easier project for our buildings to take on, but it'll still give them some nice practice with crisis drills that we really haven't paid a lot of attention to statewide. We've done pretty well as a district doing 1 a semester, but now that we have that more to the forefront, it'll give them a little better time to practice. KSDE has revived there used to be a Kansas Safe and Prepared Schools group that was funded by the state itself. That went away about 3 years ago, and now KSDE has started the Safe and Secure Schools unit. So they're offering support to school districts as needed. I attended about a half to 3/4 day session out at Greenbush a few weeks ago and listened to what they kind of had to say in their presentation. And they're just offering some of the same things that, that we're doing, like with the Department of Homeland Security and stuff like that. The Contact Us and All Students Safe, reporting safety and or bullying concerns, that is active and working now, and I wanted to pull that up real quick. So when you go to the district webpage, you'll click on, well, I'm going to back one up. I know they did this. So the All Students Safe button, and that takes you to this page right here, and they can click on Report Bullying, and it gives you the instructions, it gives you the drop-down menu, the fill-out form. So that's online and going for us now. From the beginning. Then we also distributed Be Smart gun safety information to our families. When we did our community conversations, we had the presenter come, as well as offering up that information on our website. I think these are some screenshots. You can see where the All Students Safe is and where the Contact Us pops up onto the web page. For the next part, I'm going to ask Jose Cornejo to come up and talk a little bit about mental health and social emotional supports. Obviously, this is very important again to the community. In response to the strategic plan, we've added safety to the social emotional theme 3.
Good evening. So everything that we're working on is tied directly to our strategic plan objective of social emotional learning and safety for students in our buildings. It is a collaborative effort in terms of me collaborating with Ron, as well as our mental health teams in our buildings, looking at the safety and security of our students, but also collaborating with our community members in our community. So that's working with Bert Nash, and it seems like this last year we've met with Bert Nash about once a month, in some cases twice a month, looking at not only the RAP program, but looking at how we're going to collaborate and work together to address the needs of our students and individuals in our community. And so through that collaboration, we recognize that Bert Nash also has a role in supporting the needs of our students and families when it comes to safety and security in our community. We also continue to use our social skill curriculum to teach our students the soft skills so that they develop empathy and problem-solving skills. And at the grade school level, they continue to use positive action social skill curriculum, and at the secondary schools, the Connect with Kids curriculum. We also, for the last 3 years, we've had a threat assessment tool that we've shared with our administrators, and that allows us to mitigate any potential threat that we are aware of in our buildings, whether that is another student bringing it to our attention, or is it something we pick up on social media, or just through a parent calling us up on the phone. And the administrators can take the tool and investigate to determine if it's a serious or very serious threat, and then take the appropriate steps and actions to keep the building safe, and then also provide ongoing support for that student if needed through our mental health team members or a RAP specialist if it's at one of the 6th grade schools or the secondary schools. And then this last year, Ron and I attended a conference put on by the Secret Service in Kansas City, attended probably by 500 district employees from across this Northeast region. And the 3 things that they shared with us in that conference was schools that have a strong MTSS, or in our district it's CI3T, or a PBIS program, Positive Behavior Intervention Support System, and a strong emphasis on relationships, reduce the risk of violence and threats, weapon threats in their buildings. And the one thing they stressed the most was relationships. And so This last year, both high schools did a relationship exercise where they asked students to identify an adult in the building that they connected with. The mental health team took that information and broke it down, identified the teachers that were mentioned the most frequent in that, and then also identified the kids that didn't list an adult and followed up. They're in the process of following up with those students. Either the counselors calling the student in to meet with them, the social worker, the RAP specialist, the school psychologist, somebody in the mental health team that has a relationship or knows the student, calling them in to see if there is an adult in the building that they connect with. Because sometimes kids just didn't list an adult because they didn't clearly understand the question, but they did have an adult in the building that they identified with and connect with. So the idea is to keep this project moving forward so that as kids come back next year, we'll look at that again to make sure that kids continue to have a significant adult in the building that they can communicate with. May not necessarily be an adult at one of our high schools. It may be an adult that they have a close connection with at the middle school level or at the grade school level. But the idea is to stress to these students the importance of having that important adult in their lives so that when times are stressful, that they have that adult that they can connect with or go to and communicate whatever their needs might be.
How are you, when a teacher's name pops up multiple times, how are those staff being utilized, I guess?
Well, I know at Lawrence High, in talking with Mark Pruitt and Matt Brungard, the idea was to visit with those teachers and figure out, what are they doing to develop those relationships with those students and try to figure out what can we learn from those teachers to maybe share with other teachers that might need some guidance or some development on building relationships.
Talk about this project as part of that, maybe developing some sort of professional development that would be sort of based around the experience of these teachers, or, I'm just kind of, what really is going to be done? It's like, okay, great, kudos, teacher X, everybody.
I think that's a great
really
suggestion
like
that we
you,
can
then
take
what?
to the professional development committee to look at. Is that something we offer come August on relationship building with students and relationship buildings with coworkers, in that respect as well.
And even
I requested the list of those teachers. I have the names of the teachers here, and we were talking about how we could capture, just maybe have a conversation, a round table, maybe capture that on video about what are some of those skills that our teachers are obviously skilled with in terms of building those relationships that we can not only leverage in our high schools, but leverage throughout our district as well.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of...
Send it out as a newsletter or something.
No, I'm going first.
No. Is there like a way to kind of assess what, is it there's more teachers than, say, custodians, but like even looking into like, support staff and other staff so that, because, some kids probably feel like, okay, I can talk to a secretary or a custodian or a para, and why is that? Like, is it because it's like not in that classroom setting? Is it in the hallway?
Right.
Maybe that's their trusted adult. So it'll be interesting to kind of.
Yeah. I guess I really loved the idea when it was first sort of put forward that was happening at LHS, to kind of like doing that, asking students. I'm interested to see what we do with it.
Right.
I'll freely admit that I'm a data wonk. That there's a treasure trove of data in there that I think you could slice and dice 1,000 different ways to develop PD. And the thing that comes to mind for me is those kids that put nobody down is to try to go through and try and figure out what's the commonality between those groups of kids that you could start to identify at the middle school level, or even when they come in as a freshman, of what's the commonality, or is it something as simple as, do they put no one because they're kids that aren't involved in choir, band, orchestra, they don't play a sport, they don't do drama, so there's no extra, they come in at 7:30, they leave at 3. Is it something that simple? Is it more broad? Is it, what are some factors, what are some things that we can use that data then as part of a professional development that we can help teachers to look for, to then reach out to kids to start to develop a relationship, something along those lines too.
It's interesting, I just asked for the top 5 or 6 teachers from each one of the high schools, but it's interesting, of the total of about 12 teachers, only 2 of them were from the core areas. So a lot of them were in the arts and career and tech. Those most hands-on and performing classrooms.
Jose, can you clarify again? So your intention is to do this again at the high school level next year. Is that what I understood? You're going to ask the students this question again next year?
The administrators will be responsible for implementing and replicating this next year.
And will we do it at the middle school level or just the high school level?
I haven't had any discussion, but I think Dr. Lewis has kind of instructed us that he'd like to see it done
Yes,
across
we will
the
do it
district.
at the middle school level.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jose.
And finally, so ongoing, these are the remaining items that we had generated based on community discussion, community surveys, input. And these are items that aren't necessarily in my field, but administratively we've been, I'm on some of these, but they've been assigned to different administrators at the building and district level to work on. And I think we would be safe to say that by early fall, August, September sometime, we could give you some information further on these items. Adding texting to our district of notification, the school messenger system, explore the safety and suicide prevention apps and text hotlines that are kind of becoming more prevalent and available. Research clear backpacks and effectiveness of metal detectors in buildings. Discuss safety issues and with open lunch. Study prevention measures and early warning signs for some of these things that we were just talking about. When do we see those kids starting to kind of pull into a shell at the elementary and middle levels, and how can we prevent that from happening? Examine the causes of weapons possessions and examine inventory of radios for quality and consistency across the district.
So this list is just, this is the information that you gathered from the community meetings.
Yes.
So just to be clear, on the bullet point 3, research clear backpacks and effectiveness of metal detectors. I wouldn't want you to spend a whole lot of time on that because there's not a lot of board will for either one of those things.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
I actually wanted to comment on that one too, and I'll follow that up. I heard questions about those things from lots of people in the community immediately after the events at Lawrence High, and I can certainly understand why we got lots of questions around that. I just wanted, in that vein, to point out that there was an article that came out this last week on a research study that was done by some University of Toledo and Ball State University researchers. They looked at 18 years of reports on school security measures and their effectiveness, and their conclusion was that hardening of schools with measures like metal detectors had no discernible, they couldn't find data to support that had any discernible impact on reducing school violence. And their conclusion was that rather it was represented more of an attempt to alleviate fears of parents and students in the community, but in some circumstances actually created additional fears among students because it does two things. It gives a false sense of security to people that we're doing something when it doesn't actually do what they think it's doing, and then it also creates anxiety among students about the need to have them. So, I think there are lots of things that we can consider doing and that we should be considering doing, and those, some of those things are on this list. But I would echo Kelly's concern that not be something that we spend a lot of our time and energy on, because I think there are lots of other more effective things that we can do around relationship building and mental health supports. Interestingly enough, and this is something else, if it's okay to take a minute, that I wanted to comment on the broader issue, and I'm really glad that we sent home the Be Smart gun safety information with participants in those community conversations, and that we've made it available to parents, because when I went through the ALICE training here on April 12th, one of the things that struck me the most about that, beyond learning how to break a window, which I did not know how to do effectively, so I actually did learn something very important safety-wise, but one of the things that really struck me the most is that these people who do professional training for universities and schools and businesses, one of the things they stress the most is that if you are in a situation where you have managed to disarm somebody who has a weapon, you are under no circumstances supposed to pick it up or even handle it, because the first responders who are coming to the scene are trained to shoot you on sight because they believe that you are the primary threat if you are holding the weapon. And so it raises a lot of policy issues for me, because in this broader conversation, and obviously the federal report that came out didn't really help this very much on after the Parkland shooting, talking about putting additional armed personnel in our buildings, and there continues to be debate about should we arm our staff, and to me, the fact that safety experts are saying don't have this in your possession, it is dangerous for you if you are in this situation, should be the thing that tells people that arming our teachers to deal with these issues is the very last thing that we should be talking about. That we should also be talking about the fact that a majority of guns that are used in school violence situations come from the homes of the people who are the perpetrators. And so if we are going to really make a difference in safety issues in our buildings, we have to be having the conversation about what we can do in our buildings that's really within our control, but we also have to be advocating in our community and with our legislators and in our state for policies that make sense about that. And we can't really do what we want to do, which is to keep our kids safe in our buildings, if our community and our policymakers are not going to support us by making it less possible for people to have these weapons in their possession and bring them into our buildings in the first place. So I needed to say that. I've said it a couple times, but I needed to say it again, because it doesn't, we can't do this by ourselves. And so I really appreciate all the work that our staff is doing around all of these issues. But if we're at the point where we're talking about having to put metal detectors at our doors, we have lost already.
Do you have a timeline for some of these things, just out of curiosity? I mean, I know we've been talking about like adding a text notification system for over a year, and our radios. We talked about radios last year too. So I'm kind of just curious what your timeline for.
I think our goal is to have things in place by beginning of the school year next year. We'd be able to give you some pretty good answers on most of this by late August, early September.
Texting should be coming at the beginning soon. Is that a fair statement, Julie? I know part of what we talk about in the Power School meeting is that we're putting together a little flyer of USD 497 mobile experience that of all the different apps that we're going to include, but part of it will be the school messenger app with texting and some other things. So
Dar's right. We have some work to do on Power School. We have to have the infrastructure in place to accept the information that we need to get to School Messenger to do the texting. So we're working on that now. First.
It all comes back to Power School.
Dar's right.
But we're working on it.
So you're hoping to have several things in place before the fall semester starts? Okay.
Yes. Anything else? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Fine, you can leave it.
I can leave it? Sorry. Let me close out.
Okay, our next report is on elementary counselors, and I think we still have Jose for that report, and also maybe Darcy Krause. Darcy. Okay. All right.
I'm here for moral support.
Okay, that sounds great.
Go, Jose. Go, Jose.
I just read what I'm given in the memo.
Well, thank you. I'm going to give you an update on the elementary counselors program. But first, I'd like to recognize the elementary counselors that are here, if you would allow me. Let me take my glasses off so I can see. We have, stand when I call you, please. Kylie Luckett from Swigler. From Pinckney. Johnson from Prairie Park. Tooth from Broken Arrow. From Sunset. Miss anybody? Well, thanks for this opportunity. I want to share with you, a lot of the information I'm going to share with you is baseline data. This is first year that we've started collecting some of this data related to counseling services at the elementary level, okay? So in terms of looking back multiple years, we really won't have some comparisons in terms of time usage. We can talk about the social skill curriculum that's been in place for the last 5 years, those type of things. But one of the things I wanted to share with you is some of the key roles served in our counseling program. Now, keep in mind that, our counselors come to work every day with the best intentions of delivering classroom guidance lessons and performing their counseling duties. And sometimes it takes one student or a couple students to really change the structure or their schedule for the day. And so their responsive services, the amount of time that they spend responding to the needs of our students based on the student seeking them or staff members seeking their service, can sometimes interfere with how their day is performed. But this is just a sense that they do facilitate small groups. They do facilitate classroom guidance lessons on a regular basis. Every counselor has a schedule that they provide and maintain throughout the school day and do everything within their power and integrity to make sure that they're touching the lives of students on a day-to-day basis, whether that be through classroom guidance lessons, greeting them before school, after school, between classes, in whatever fashion they can have impact on a student. They are performing that on a day-to-day basis. They monitor students' social emotional behavior development. They work collaboratively with the teachers to identify, where are some of the deficits, where are some of the challenges, where are some of the strengths that our students have, and they continue to build on those areas with the students, whether they be individually or as a class. They advocate on behalf of their students. Most of the schools have student councils, so they use that student council voice to advocate for improving things at school or promoting activities at school or bringing things into the building that would enhance engagement or support the students in the building. They also support their co-workers, their teachers in the building, either through professional development or just providing a space for the teacher to meet with them if they need an opportunity to just vent a little or express some of the stressors that are going on in their life at the moment. And then resource acquisition, looking at what are the needs of our students and trying to link families with resources in our community, whether that be taking students and families to our clothing closet at East Heights or linking them with agencies and organizations in our community for utility assistance or rent assistance, or just getting their basic needs met, or getting some of their mental health needs met through Bird Nash and helping them navigate that path. Our counselors have a program guide that we re-implemented this last school year in August. This is the goal that's in that guide. All of our building administrators had the opportunity to review this before we rolled it out in August, but this is the goal that our counselors kind of helps guide them in some of their best practices, which are aligned through the Kansas Counseling Association, as well as the American Council for School Counselors, ASCA. And so we use that goal. We understand that it's a living goal, and so it could change based on our district needs. We want to make sure that it's aligned with the district so that it meets the needs of all our buildings across the district. We also make sure that anything we do is aligned with the state's social emotional character development standards, so that we're also meeting the standards that the state have identified in what they determine as a successful 21st century student, providing those soft skills and those character skills that students will need once they leave our public schools. So this last fall, we did a time assessment exercise with our counselors. They collected data for over a week. And the idea was to take a week of your time and calculate on 15-minute increments how your time is utilized in your building. This is a practice that's recommended through ASCA, the National Association for Counselors. School counseling core curriculum, that's the classroom guidance lessons. Individual student planning, those are lessons or opportunities where you meet with a student. And then responsive services could be tier 2 groups, groups facilitated for specific needs of students. So those 3 categories are considered direct student services. According to ASCA and the Kansas Counseling Association, counselors want to spend 80% of their time in those 3 categories. And our counselors do a good job of spending the bulk of their time in those 3 categories. Referrals, consultation, and collaboration, that's collaborating with parents, teachers, on looking at what are the needs of students in the building. Program foundation, that's evaluating the effectiveness of their counseling program at their particular building, but then also evaluating how are their services being delivered in their building and are they hitting the targets of the needs of the students in their building. And then fair share responsibility, that's helping your building with the responsibilities of running a successful building. So if it's helping support by passing out or giving PBIS or positive behavior tickets to students, that would be considered fair share responsibility, or helping out if there's a particular activity or event going on at the school to support students, that would be considered that. Non-school counseling tasks are things that are really not directly related to the counseling service program. So it could be being in charge of attendance or being in charge of overseeing all the testing in the building. Those would be considered non-counseling tasks. So this is the fall data. This is the spring data. And you'll notice in the next slide where it compares the fall to the spring that there is a slight increase in the delivery of core curriculum lessons and a decline in responsive services, but it all still falls within that 80% realm of direct student services for our counselors. Our counselors did a wonderful job of taking this document and creating it into a Google Doc where it automatically calculates and tabulates the time into graphs. So it's a document that we'll be able to use moving forward. And then working with Joe Smizer in IT, we also, on the backside, built in a system where it calculates it all as district-wide. And so we can not only pull it by building, but we could look at all 14 elementary schools to see how our counselors are doing in their schools when it comes to meeting the needs of our students. So the number of groups implemented as a result of the SSRS e-screener that we do 3 times a year in our buildings, there were 185 groups across the district that were created from data from that screener. The number of students referred to those groups was 855, and the number of students that participated in Tier 2 groups across the district was 683. And the thing to remember is that the 855 students that were identified doesn't necessarily mean that they needed a Tier 2 group. It says that they needed some type of intervention, but group wasn't necessarily the intervention that was necessary for that student. It doesn't mean that we didn't meet the need of that student or provide some type of intervention for them. We also asked the counselors to share with us the number of suicide interventions that they have performed this school year to date, and as of today, it's 137. Compared to last year, it was 142. So you can look at that data in a couple ways. One is, because counselors are in our buildings full-time, our teachers have an opportunity to refer students to them that are in stress or in crisis. But also remember, when we collect information on our suicide intervention data, if a student is upset and they make the comment that they wish they were dead or die, we still assess that and treat it as if a student actually had a plan, because we want to make sure that that student isn't at risk of following through with the plan. But we also want to make sure that we have an opportunity to work with that student to give them the appropriate language when they're upset, and to say I'm upset or I'm mad versus I want to die or I wished I was dead. And it also gives us a chance to have a conversation with their parents so that they can follow up with their child as well, to work with them on replacement language, but also to supervise them through the night to make sure that they remain safe. And so that data is probably always going to be fairly high, because we ask our counselors and our social workers to track all interventions, whether it's a low risk or a high risk, so that we can have a sense of the number of interventions we're performing across the district.
When a counselor does a suicide intervention like that, how is there an average timeline that they'll continue to follow up with that student? Like, obviously they'll check on them the next day, but is it like a week? Is it 2 weeks? Does it depend on the risk level? Is it?
Right, it depends. We do follow up with them, especially if we keep them at school. We want to check up on them to make sure they're doing okay, but we also want to communicate with the teacher to handle that student with care. And if they start to, escalate a little bit, to make sure that they know that they can come to the counselor right away, especially at the secondary level where they're changing classes quite a bit. But at the grade school level, the counselors will monitor the students pretty regularly and have conversations with parents throughout as needed.
Good.
We also encourage parents to call us as well. So I just want to thank you for committing to our counselors for every one of our elementary schools, and giving them an opportunity to work with our students in a holistic way. I really do value the work that they do, and I know that the principals do as well. At this time, I'd like to invite Jeremy and Christy Hill up just to kind of speak for a couple minutes. As principals, as mental health facilitator, I can speak to you about how I work with the counselors and my interaction with them. But Jeremy and Philip actually are the principals who oversee the counselors in their program, and they have a greater sense of the direct impact that counselors have had on their buildings. So I'll give them a minute.
Shannon has a quick...
Before we transition to that, can I just ask one follow-up question? Regarding the data on the suicide interventions, do we track that kind of data for our schools that do have RAP workers? Would they have additional instances of intervention activity with students that would not be captured by those numbers? This is just elementary school counselors, right?
No.
No, it's not.
This is
Total interventions?
Our student tracking form is shared with all the mental health professionals
so it's everybody
in that
on
building,
the team.
and we use one student tracking form.
Okay.
So that all the data and information is going into one form. And the reason behind that is because if I did an intervention on Monday,
right,
and then you met with the same kid on Thursday, you could see that on that tracking form to see if there's a change in the stressor. And so we could start to figure out, okay, what's triggering this student to feel suicidal.
Okay, but these are just elementary school numbers.
Correct.
Right. I think that's a pretty. I know that we are looking at a range of risk, and that sometimes it's not a real risk. It's the language the student is using. But in the broader context of what we are asked to do for our students, that's a pretty remarkable number of elementary students that we are talking to about these issues.
I would agree.
I'm so grateful that our staff can do that work, because there's clearly a lot of need. Thanks.
Hi. I was thrilled when Darcy and Jose asked me to speak this evening regarding the impact of having a full-time counselor at Pinckney. As you know, Pinckney and the East Side schools were pretty small, but we do have some of the most needy kids in the district. Having a full-time counselor this year at Pinckney has meant that there's someone way more qualified than me to work with kids daily who might be struggling with issues, whether they're a crisis or maybe a small group or an individual intervention. We have made morning meeting time a priority at Pinckney since I've been here. Teachers use the district social skills curriculum one lesson every week in their classroom. And we have also built our own equity activity called Hero of the Week that our classroom teachers do on one of the other morning meetings. But then they can use the other two to plan team building activities or just discussions in their classroom to build a community. The great part of having a full-time counselor, though, is that our students at Pinckney receive 2 guidance lessons every month taught by a school counselor. All of these things together really have made what I feel like at Pinckney is a robust Tier 1 intervention for social and emotional learning. She's over there. Erin has been a remarkable addition to Pinckney in terms of just what our students need, getting to know every student. So when you talk about those indications of kind of that suicidal, I mean, we know every kid at Pinckney, and so we see them almost every day, if not every day, and can kind of follow up with them. But she has that training and counseling background that maybe the principal doesn't always have. So I've been really appreciative to have that full-time person at Pinckney. Selfishly, having a counselor every day has allowed me to get out into our classrooms and do lots more walkthroughs and really work with some of our teachers in terms of their evaluations to make sure that our kids get high-quality, standards-based instruction. She also provides a little bit of counseling for me, the principal, but it has made a big difference at Pinckney for me and for all of our staff, and most importantly, the kids. So thank you for dedicating the money and, well, for finding a great person to at least be at Pinckney. So thanks.
Madam President, distinguished board, Dr. Lewis, thank you for this opportunity to speak a little bit about the excellent decision that was made last year to bring a full-time counselor to Sunset Hill, where I have the honor of being the principal. And listening to the presentation that Jose just gave about roles and data, I think it really distills to 2 things for me and our school community, and that is relationships and proactivity. And so when I think of relationships and having a counselor, it really is a must be present to win kind of thing. To build relationships, you've got to be there. And last year, our counselor, Miss Adkins, we shared with another school, and this year, selfishly, we get her that whole time. And so that allows her to have a much greater increase in visibility around the school. Obviously, as Jose had mentioned, with classes, small groups, and individual work with students, that's excellent. But really what that does is that provides students with the theory, and having her there full-time to work on those relationships, it takes the theory and puts it into practice. In our building, Miss Adkins is known as the Ladybug, because she's the lady. If something bugs you, you go see. And doing a little bit of data, last year our Ladybug notes, which we have a system where the students are allowed to provide notes to the counselor just to check in. And last year we had, by the end of the year, 215 notes. As of last Friday, we have 414. That does not mean that we have more problems at Sunset Hill, but what that means is that we have a very clear relationship for students. They know that there is someone in the building all the time that they can go to. And that is just a huge asset. It really does, as I said, take theory into practice. And as we look at that practice, we have the theme of proactivity that has bubbled up. Amanda and I have talked a lot about the fact that really what feels different this year is that we're not in crisis mode. When we talk about mental health, it's not just the must contact conversations, like I've got to talk to these parents. She actually has the opportunity to reach out to families, staff members with it would be nice. And so what I see is we have a counseling program and we have a mental health program that is proactive, and that is huge because obviously decisions made in that stressful environment are not best. And so having her there allows us to have that proactive view. And like I said, it's not just our students, but our families and our staff that benefit from this. So I do want to just say thank you again for making this decision. It really is an incredible asset at Sunset Hill. I appreciate it. And our families and students and staff do as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So to the guidance counselor from Schwegler, your first name is, or your Ms. Okay, I didn't hear it. But so when I was just newly appointed to the board, you were one of the very first people that I met. I don't know that you know this, but that's true in terms of district staff. And I went to see you at a board lunch or breakfast we had, and Darcy was there, and we were talking about learning coaches, and they all stood out to me. But honest to goodness, I've met hundreds now of staff, and you still resonate. The way that you connected and communicated, not just with children, but with your colleagues and teachers in the building, just really stuck with me, so that when I, as a new board member, was charged with making a decision about whether or not we have a counselor in every building, it really was you that stood out to me. And I didn't think I would get a chance to recognize, so I appreciate the work you did. Thank you.
Kylie, you are the best.
Yeah,
I am
second that
not the best. You are the best, so thanks.
Anything else? Thank you to all of our counselors who came tonight, and we really appreciate everything that you do for our students every day, so thank you. Our next report is on middle school interventionists, and I believe that Rick Henry, Director of Secondary Schools, looks like you're going to be joined by a couple principals.
Mr. Kemp and Dr. Jones.
Okay, he's passed it off, so that's not on my piece of paper.
It's called delegation.
It is delegation.
It's leadership quality.
I'll just let you introduce yourselves then.
Right. Good evening.
Good evening.
Okay, it's lining up. Dr. Jones, representing Billy Mills Middle School, and
Of course, Brad Kemp, West Middle School.
and we're kind of speaking on behalf of the administrative team for the middle school principals. We've had the pleasure of working or having student interventionists this past year, and we wanted to
introduce you to
actually, they're going to be speaking as well tonight. So actually, we have Mr. Josh Mosier, who is working at Billy Mills and Southwest, and we have Ivy Briggs that's at Liberty Memorial Central and West. And so they will get a chance to speak during our presentation tonight about their experiences and talk about some of the pros and cons and kind of get some more detailed from their experience. But before we get to that, I kind of want to just touch upon some ground, some background in the purpose of the interventionist position from last year. And one word we kind of highlighted was to be proactive. I'm not going to read everything on the screen for you today, but definitely the primary purpose was for them to be proactive in our social and emotional and behavior of all students, to provide leadership to staff, and are implementing our intervention initiatives, such as being on our mental health teams, being on our CF3T teams, and really collaborating and working with our staff and students. And so this has increased the staff's capacity to effectively implement identified core practices. And so I think over the course of the year, we found some very positive things that has worked in various buildings, and then also some challenges that we'll kind of share with you tonight. Here are some of the key roles of the interventionist. I'm going to highlight 2 or 3 that I've kind of previously just kind of already mentioned that's kind of stood out. And really, one is the providing the professional development, for staff, either on a Wednesday or a day where we have the staff for an entire time to give them strategies to be successful with our students, whether it's student engagement, whether it's a lack of motivation, whether it's a kiddo that's struggling in the classroom, being that support and that, I won't say the buffer, but definitely that bridging the gap between administration and teacher. And one of the other things that stands out is building the gap between parents. I think in the school, being able to call parents and tell them and give them updates on things that their kid may be struggling with in the classroom, where it doesn't seem like a negative or punitive call from the administration, but it's someone who is supporting them daily. And as you'll see as they get up to speak about what some of their day-to-day roles look like, checking in and checking out with certain kids and having caseloads of kids. And so that has been very effective in their role. And lastly, I'll talk about analyzing some of the data. We are looking to be more effective in our approach and being strategic and intentional about working with the targeted kids that may need that extra support that we've identified through our mental health teams and our team meetings and things of that nature. So they've been a very good asset in some of those categories.
So just kind of looking at the support they provide only to the building itself and then to the staff, we kind of broke it down. So Dr. Jones talked about compiling data or discussing data either at team meetings or in, say, mental health teams. They look at grades, assessments, and pull all that together. They identify some red flags that each building has. It could be a process, it could be a student, it just kind of depends. They also, that professional development, so I know Ivy has done some de-escalation training. We brought in some of our KU supports with that, and we spent a day talking about how to de-escalate kids. So that PD has been very valuable. Along with this, their membership on our building leadership teams and our CI3T teams to make sure those are getting implemented with fidelity across the building. The next one is this kind of teacher support. They're supporting teachers in the classroom. Sometimes they can go in and do some observation, work with that teacher or with that team of teacher to give them some ideas, some strategies to maybe work with a student on their caseload. It's that consulting and brainstorming. A lot of times when you're in the mode of teaching, you don't catch everything, so it's kind of that third eye that they can kind of come in looking at a certain individual or class or group and provide some very research-based strategies for some of the modifications, either in academics or behavior. The other piece is attending team meetings or the professional learning communities. Working with teachers hand in hand. It's really been kind of interesting to work with the interventionists because we're pulling students, but we're also working with teachers at the same time. So trying to figure out what that role is, and we'll talk about some of those challenges later. But it's been kind of different in each building, depending on what that building needs. The one thing I think we're all kind of excited about, we're starting to see, they went to KIP Core training back in November. So we're starting to see some of the restorative practices, and we're kind of testing the waters in those, seeing how we can use that in our school environments. And then this to support in CI3T, working with teachers to have a store, to have a menu of items for those positive behavior interventions has really helped a lot of teachers out in our buildings.
Right. So at this time, we're going to allow Josh and Ivy to come up and kind of share some personal experiences and testimonials of what has worked in their role this year.
Well, I have the unique opportunity as I walked into one of the buildings. I taught at West for 6 years, so I was kind of at an advantage because I already had some relationships built with staff. I think that made things a little smoother initially, whereas at Liberty Memorial, I had to build those relationships and start those conversations, whereas people at West knew me and knew where I was coming from. But on either side of those, a lot of the students that I've worked with or staff I've worked with are simply because staff have brought them to my attention, or looking at data, we've had conversations where I've said, notice these kids, and teachers will sometimes say, oh, we were on that. And so there's nothing we need. The tier 1, 2 things are already in place. But just coming together, check in, check out, can be as much as 5 to 10 minutes. And that's when we even talk about and do some PD with staff on the fact that advisory is a great tool for our advisory teachers to do some of that. But with some of the students I've worked with, it's organization. And so just having that person to model and walk through, when you have 6 assignments missing and one of them's worth 3 points and the other one's worth 40, let's start with the 40-point assignment, which seems like a no-brainer, but at middle school, not so much, and they get overwhelmed really quickly. So helping them do that. For some of those students, it's just having a person. A lot of times, these are the students that aren't the ones who are acting out, but get lost in the crowd, and intentionally. I have one student I've worked with, he's very quiet, and I had teachers come to me at one point. I said, we've got some student, I've got some time. Who do you have that you think would be successful with some support? They said, he does nothing. We know he's capable, but he's doing nothing. And so just starting to meet with the student and occasionally working 20, 30 minutes when there's an assignment the student's really struggling with to get that student going. That student went from failing everything to C's or better in the majority of classes, and right now only 1F. And a lot of times those conversations are things like, I can't believe the teacher wants me to write a 5-paragraph paper. Well, come on, you can do this. And just supporting that and modeling that for that student has been huge. I've had teachers come to me talking about, I had a teacher who was struggling with her advisory. It was just a tough group, and I've had some other teachers come in and say, this specific class is just hard. I'm having trouble connecting, or I'm having trouble figuring out what we need to do to help them become more engaged. So after going to KIP Corps, I had a teacher come to me about her advisory, and I said, let's try a Tier 1 circle once a week. And so I went in and facilitated the first couple, then we worked together to come up with a plan, and then the teacher took over that role. And I just pop in once in a while, and they're still using that once a week. I might I have a couple resources that have scripted Tier 1 circle conversations, so it's not extra planning for that teacher. And that teacher has felt like it's really improved the relationships in that classroom. So those are just a few ways I think that it's helped. If you have specific questions, I can answer those as well. I'll let Josh talk a little.
Yeah, so unlike Ivy, I come from this is my first year in the district. So building those relationships were initially tough for me, but I think what helped me the most with that was being able to have the coaching opportunities at each school. So I coached football at Billy Mills Middle School, and I coached track at Southwest Middle School. And having the ability to do that helped me build those relationships with the students and the staff. Obviously, it took me a little bit more time at Southwest because track is in the spring, but just going into the school year, knowing those kids at Billy Mills, I already had the relationship down. The teachers knew me. It just made it that much more easier. I think one thing that Ivy and I do very well with the check-in, check-out is in the mornings when we check in with some of our students on our caseload, is that we make sure that their essential needs have been met for the morning or that day. If they got breakfast, if they got enough sleep, a lot of times most of the time that does affect how they do and how they work in the classrooms. We also do a lot of mentorship programs at both buildings with the GGI Bang and with the boys group that we have at Billy Mills Middle School, and then also with Watchdogs. We both play a big part in doing all of that and organizing it and running it. Building relationships, and that's mainly what I'm here for. I have a good rapport with students, and for the most part with teachers. That's probably the hardest thing for me, especially being brand new, is to getting on the positive relationship side on staff. It's rough when they don't know you and you're only there half the week. So just kind of establishing that. But for the most part, the students and doing some of the things that are mentioned up on this slide, that we do every day is makes the relationship building process a lot easier for us.
I had a question a little bit. I know one of the main differences between the interventionists, or I'm inferring, is that the student support. But how is it when what's the difference, the comparison when you have like a teacher leader and the interventionists? Because it sounds like maybe you're doing dual. Is that accurate?
A lot of overlap, and actually one of the struggles we have is the overlap even between the role of a learning coach and the role of, I'm trying to think who else we have, counselors. And and we're in and out of buildings and not consistently there, so that's a struggle. We want somebody else to be there for those students when we're not there, especially for some of our students who need a little more intensive support. But the more people you get involved, sometimes the harder it is for the students, or for us, the communication can be more of a challenge. So there is a lot of overlap. I know at Liberty Memorial at one point, the learning coach and I got together and made a little Venn diagram we shared with staff to kind of clarify where one of us is and the other is and what's for both of us. But the waters get muddied sometimes. Once you have that relationship with that student, they may go to you for things that normally would fall under somebody else's purview.
How much time do you think you're spending doing direct disciplinary actions at the buildings?
I don't spend a lot of time on direct discipline. I'm more supporting and being proactive and supporting teachers in being proactive. I've gone in and done some co-teaching with teachers and modeling, primarily using PBIS and how to teach the behaviors we want to see rather than being reactive.
So you're working less with the students in a disciplinary role and more with the teachers in that, and kind of talking through how to do different things.
Mm-hmm. And the time spent with students is often facilitating or supporting more organization, grades, or processing things. Sometimes it's like the co-writer app thing was a small group, and then you just follow up and check in with those students once in a while. I've supported teachers in writing some behavior plans where they might have a check-in sheet for that student or a point sheet each day, but the teachers are facilitating that. And I usually just help them get it put together and sometimes follow up with a student. We've had some students who are a little resistant, and just sometimes the way you word things and hearing it from somebody that you aren't feeling like is already your teacher and bossing you around every day, when we can just sit down and kind of process with that student, that makes a difference.
And those are mainly the tier 1, tier 2 behaviors that we go in and help out with. If teachers are struggling with a student who is constantly day in and day out with those tier 1 behaviors, that's when Ivy and I would go in and we would work with that teacher, or we would sit down with that student and we would build that relationship and hey, like what Ivy said, we're not that person that they see every day on a daily basis for however long their class is every day. Sometimes it's just easier for them to hear it from somebody that is there, that they see, but they don't see very often. They just, oh yeah, hey, I know you, yeah, I mean, okay, I think I can do that.
So when you're in the, given that this is your first year, and the first year that we've had these roles in the district, can you tell me a little bit about the evaluate? I know that we're kind of doing that right now, an assessment of the evaluation of the role, but how are you doing self-evaluation of processes, procedures, practices related to these new positions within the district? Do you feel like you're being supported in that? Because it sounds like there's been some, a component of this year has been defining what the role is within each building and developing relationships. And then how are we tracking your impact on students and on the teacher and the teaching experience? Are we capturing that some way?
Well, I log when I meet with students or teachers, and even the time I spend in team meetings. And then just reflecting, I meet with my principals weekly at some point just to reflect and talk about what supports are there, and then just informally with teachers as well. I think, and then I use data. I'm kind of a data addict like GR is, so I use a lot of it. People who've worked with me will tell you. Just pulling it up, looking at where students are, and looking at where, I have teacher requests.
Where do you think you've had the most impact this year?
Challenge. I think it's broad.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the biggest pieces is building the relationship with staff and having them see this role as something that is supportive of them and students. And if I look back at my data, one of the things I noticed is I had a lot of first quarter meetings and going in, and I was initiating things, and now there's a lot more students on my list. Or specifically, teachers will say, oh, I noticed this, can you just meet with the student, or can you help us brainstorm? Mm-hmm. Staff are starting to request more. They're starting to understand the role and see it as something that's useful. And it is hard not being in the building every day. Sometimes when they need you, there's an email. There are days I shuffle my schedule to be somewhere else because that's where I need to be.
Okay. That makes sense. Would you add to that at all? Or?
Yeah. Adding on to what Ivy said and echoing a lot of what she said, is definitely I log all of my student interactions and all of my meetings that I like to get into my schedule. What it looks like this year is I'm fortunate enough to be able to go into every team meeting, grade level meeting, and it's been nice because I can go in there and they can ask me, like, hey, this student is concerned to me. Like, is there anything that you would recommend, or whatever, whatnot? Or like, hey, do you think that you can sit down and have a conversation with this student and just kind of find out what's going on, why they're not motivated, or and so a lot of our role isn't really necessarily with the tier 1, tier 2 behaviors, but it's a lot of the academic as well. So, like, why is this kid, he hasn't turned in an assignment in 3 weeks? Or do you think you can sit down and have a conversation with them about, what's going on? Like, why is there a common theme that, after lunch, you just give up for the rest of the day or whatever, whatnot? So, those are all things that we log in our daily logs in our student.
Okay. All right, appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Just because I collected a lot of this information for BPEC, they are seeing a total of 103 students in 4 buildings.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah,
okay, thank you.
At one point, a kid is accessed or they've accessed a kid, so
okay, great.
It's pretty good.
So are those kids also seeing the counselor, or these individual?
I would have to look. It probably depends on individual, but I think when we set out as principals, we're really looking for maybe the students that didn't have a person. So we look at like our ELL students, they have a coordinator. We look at our SPED, they have SPED and resource teachers, counselors, and mental health team kind of have that, the high 10% that we're looking at for that. So these, when we kind of started off, was how do we find kids that need support but maybe aren't accessing or do not have access to an adult.
Okay, thank you.
And I see what the benefit of that is. A lot of our counselors, I think our interventionists bring a skill set to where they can go in and look in the classroom and give strategies to teachers to help to see how to be proactive with the behavior, almost coaching in classroom management. Whereas a counselor wouldn't do that, or a learning coach could possibly help, set up your lessons, to have a nicely planned, engaging lesson. But then some students, no matter what the lesson is, have other issues outside those variables that we can't control. And so that's where I feel like the two of them have done a great job at kind of interceding some of those situations.
Okay, thank you.
We've kind of already addressed some of the first-year positives. I think Ivy and Josh did a great job at kind of talking about some of those things, whether it's the check-in, check-out interventions, being very visible and helpful on our CF3T teams. I kind of spoke already earlier about communicating with parents and bridging the school to home gap, and then teaching students to appropriately self-advocate. I think that is... You may see that in small groups or lunch bunch or things of that nature, but I think to have one-on-one interaction where you've been working with the student since August, and now maybe in April you're seeing less infractions or less behaviors because they've been able to de-escalate. Now, I think the trick is sometimes we think just because we have interventionists that the behaviors is going to go away. And I think that's where we have to do some more educating and working with our teachers and wrapping back around and having those conversations and saying, hey, Brad is used to be sent out 20 times a day, in August, because I've logged it in my interactions. But now, April, maybe I'm only seeing him like 3 or 4 times, where he's still making sometimes bad choices, but he's also improved. And I think that's where we have to show that growth mindset, because it is a shift in our teachers thinking of how we approach discipline, how we approach some of our students that are not motivated, all those different things, where we're moving to really promote, to be proactive in positive, the positive behavior system and restored practices versus punitive like consequences.
So what's interesting about that statement about the restorative practices piece is that which I'm really excited about. But what's interesting about that is when Jessica asked this piece about your enrollment in discipline and restorative practices might take us away from, we would move maybe from that word discipline to talking about intervention. So one of the things I think I envisioned, and maybe others didn't, but that they would have an active role in interventions that could previously have been characterized as disciplines, that in fact we were using approaches like restorative practice, but maybe others, to begin to think about behaviors as language and to do more plans of care to create a more positive. So it seems like they should be involved in discipline.
Absolutely, and I think that's where we're evolving to, you know, as far as looking at how do we approach discipline and be proactive and have a more restored practice versus a punitive practice. And I think that has been in the conversations I know as of late on what does that look like? What does that process look like? And having staff involvement in what that conversation looks like from point A when a kid gets sent out of class or is having some struggles to wrapping back around with that teacher, the interventionist, the principal, and having that conversation before a student enters back into the classroom. We're not there yet, but I think we're showing signs of figuring that out and seeing how that works. These are some of the lessons learned. I think we've kind of talked about some of the things that have worked, but we've also, you can hear some of the gaps and some of the things that we've talked about that we've learned this year. You know, one, you know, with them being a 0.5 in our buildings, you know, it's been tough trying for them to keep up with certain kids, whether your schedule's to be in one school on a Tuesday, half day on Wednesday, and then Friday. There's tons of things that happen on and off all the time. And so the consistency has been a struggle for both of our staff members. And needing a clearer process for identifying students requiring intervention. So kind of where do they go? Like, do they go to the counselor or do they go to us? So kind of identifying a set, like how do we obtain these kids, the students. Create a positive perception of the student interventionist with parents. I think I've heard on multiple occasions where they would call home and the parents wondering like why are you calling me? You know, like, so what's your role again? And so, you know, the administrators have really talked about, well, how do we introduce them to the public? How do we introduce them to our parents? Do parents really understand their role? And helping them understand that it's a positive thing that they're calling them, not a negative or not really knowing what they do. So I think that's been a question for them asking the administrators, like, well, what do I do when a parent is reluctant to kind of work with me at first because they don't really want to talk to me, they want to talk to you. You know, so we have to do some more educating our community and even our staff about the role as we define it. Work on strategies to increase student daily attendance in our middle schools. Or I guess that small, that's not a small percentage, but growing percentage of kids that may not be coming to school for various reasons, whether they're truant, whether those things that we are kind of looking at that. Well, how can we get them to school? And you know, we already have a great attendance record, but we can see where there are some gaps with. There's some correlations between students that are truant, that have failing grades, or that are not motivated. There are some correlation between that where our interventionists step in and trying to build that relationship between the parent, the teacher, and the administrator.
So I have a question that any of the four of you can answer. So, and it just goes to, you know, in the end, what's best for the two of you and what wins between the lesson learned of talking about a solid, consistent schedule versus Ivy making the statement of sometimes she'll rearrange her entire schedule to go meet an immediate need. So what wins of do you need a solid, consistent schedule? Because I know I've heard Dr. Jones say before what the schedule is. So my impression was that you had a consistent schedule. So then who breaks that schedule to make it not consistent? And what actually meets your needs the best? Is it having the flexibility to not be where you're supposed to be in the event of an emergency, or is it that it is a solid gold schedule that nobody can touch?
It's not solid whatsoever. We started off that way, saying we're going to be here, but as the year kind of went on, Ivy really does set her schedule between us and Central, depending on student needs. And she's very good at sharing herself between the two buildings, but it might not be that starting off that I see Ivy on Monday, Thursday, and every other Wednesday. I might see her Tuesday, Wednesday, just because something went on at the other school and she needs to deal with. So it's that constant communication between the interventionist and the two principals that kind of makes that flexibility work.
Okay.
And as far as student numbers, and it's really, looking at it, it was almost even between three of the buildings. It was like 30 between West, Central, and Billy Mills, and a little bit lower at Southwest. So it's kind of interesting to see how they're interacting or who they're interacting with too.
Right. I would echo that. I think Chris and I we do a good job at trying to stick to a schedule. Like, I think, he has some clear-cut roles, especially at Billy Mills, that the teachers are looking for him on Tuesday and Friday for sure. And if he's going to start there on Wednesday or not. So, but there have been times just because of life and what's going on. Chris and I have done a good job and Josh has done a good job at communicating with us. Like, hey, I have this going on at Southwest. Can I trade a Thursday for Friday? But that's usually done ahead of time, not really during the week. It's rarely that he'll come into a week and say, hey, I need to be somewhere. So we kind of try to really stick to those days because teachers have already expecting them to be there. So,
okay.
Any other questions about lessons learned or? There you go. Yeah, there you go. Questions.
All right. Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, I think, unless there are further announcements that you would like to make, we have a move to adjourn.
So moved.
Oh, you didn't give me time.
Oh, all right. Well, we're tabling it. Nobody seconded it. All right.
She asked me if I had anything, and then
I thought you shook your head no.
I said, but no. I just want to thank the team for putting these presentations together, and definitely thank I'd like to say our boots on the ground, and those bits. Thank you for what you do for our students, and definitely thank you to our principals for working with our staff in terms of making sure that they are allowed to do what they need to do. And also have to thank our team for putting these presentations together. Jose, somebody missing? Ron left, and Jose, and our two principals.
Okay.
Now?
Yes.
So moved.
Okay. All those in favor? Aye. Okay, we're adjourned.